Good evening, Facebook. I have been remiss in my very cool hand motion duties, like Hannah has taught me in our videos about our classes about how to create videos for social media. Check those out. Thanks for being here today. I'm Megan. I'm here with the Square One Small Business Services team at Mid-Continent Public Library. That is, in fact, the library behind me. We are thrilled to have with us our dear friend and now coworker, Xander Winkle. He will be telling you everything that you might need to know if you have a food product that you want to sell in a store or maybe other places. Legally, safety, all kinds of things. So thanks for joining us. A couple of quick housekeeping items before we get going and let Xander take the reins. Get in there in the comments. Let us know your name. If you have a business, if you have a food product, tell us what it is. We want to hear from you. You're here. You're spending your evening, your time with us. Let us know what's on your mind. Also, there in the comments throughout the class, if you've got a question about anything Xander's talking about or something comes to mind, pop those in the comments. We will be monitoring those throughout the class. Make sure you get the information that you need. And there are handouts for this class as well. If you had signed up ahead of time on our library registration, I would have emailed those to you. If you didn't get those, let me know. I'll put a link in the chat as well, so stay tuned for those. And at the end of class tonight, I will drop a link to a short little survey that helps us keep doing this programming for free on behalf of the library, and with thanks to the Kauffman Foundation for their funding that allows us to do this programming. I don't want to take any more of Xander's time. I promised 17 seconds, and I went like way over. So, Xander.
Hello. That is perfectly all right. Thank you, Megan, so much. You will notice I'm also with Mid-Continent Public Library, but I'm not at a branch because it is being built as we speak. Yes. So I will be working for the Culinary Center through Mid-Continent Public Library at the new Green Hills branch. But for right now, I'm joining you from my home. So thank you. Oh, and I love everybody's putting in, introducing themselves, putting in their products. That is excellent. And please do put in those questions. I want to make sure that tonight, all those things that you've been wondering about how to sell a food product, all those questions that you have, I want to be able to answer those or figure out where I can get that information to get that.
I'll be back seeing looking at food things, getting hungry. So holler if you need something.
All right, I'll see you, Megan. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the program. Again, want to thank the Square One team for putting this on and giving me the opportunity to talk to you all. Want to thank the Kauffman Foundation for funding these programs and making sure that they are available to you for free. So there is, at the end of this, a very short survey that helps us tell, the folks that are the Kauffman Foundation and helps, make sure that these programs continue and that they are free. And it also helps inform us on what pieces of information to include in this class. So Megan had mentioned some of the handouts. One that is new for the class. So if you've taken the class before, one of our new handouts is this fantastic food manufacturer's glossary, because it was mentioned that I would just drop food industry jargon as I was talking. And I would get questions like, wait, hold on, back up. What does that mean? So that is a dictionary of a lot of the terms that you might hear me say in the class, or that you might hear as you are getting into, the grocery store. As you are talking with those managers, they might use some of this language. So this is a handy dandy little handout. If you did not get those, post it in the comments and Megan can get that your way. Dennis, Karen, thank you both. We've got pasta sauce and we've got beverages. Okay, excellent. So the interesting thing with food products is they're all, potentially regulated just a little bit differently. So when we get into the regulations portion, I will make sure that we talk about specifics for if you're going for a shelf-stable jarred pasta sauce. And then beverages also are a little bit unique. So Karen, if you wouldn't mind sharing just a little bit more about what type of beverages, that might be helpful too, especially as we get into that regulatory portion. All right, let's jump into the program. So we're already on top of this. You're telling me who you are, what your food product is, and then make sure too that you are telling me, what is the information that you want to gather before the end of the night in this class. Let's go over a quick overview, because I promised that there's 10 steps to getting your product into stores. So let's just go over those real quick. We've got, evaluating the market. Who else is out there? Who else is selling pasta sauce? What are they doing well? What are they not doing so well? Looking over the pricing and financials. Important for any business, but very important for food businesses. The regulation overview. That's where it gets a little bit tricky depending on what your product is. And then just figuring out, how do you physically make this? Where do you make it? How do you make it? So the overall manufacturing process. We're going to take a little bit of time to go over labeling. That's going to be something that's important for food products. We'll talk about our suppliers, the ingredients, all the services that you are going to need to connect with so you can successfully get your product out there. And then step 7, the big one, is actually the process of getting into the stores. And then once you've gotten set up and a store wants to carry your product, we got to figure out the logistics. How do we get your product to the store? And then marketing, making sure that you're communicating with your end consumers to make sure now that you're in the store that people are going in and buying your product. And then everything, when it's going smoothly, how do you scale up your process and grow that business? All right, we got some more folks joining in. A potato salad product. I'd be curious if that is, if that would probably be a refrigerated product, maybe like a deli section item. Excellent. And then on the pasta sauce, jar and frozen. Okay, so those are slightly different processes on basically the same product, I'm imagining. All right, let's kind of talk about your product's market potential. And I want to drop one of my favorite terms in here. I want you to think about, what is your value proposition? What is it that basically is going to be the determining factor for why your customers would buy your product and not a competitor, or not an indirect competitor either? So maybe they're thinking of making pasta tonight, but maybe they'll also go stew. So what is it about your product that says, no, you really want the pasta, you want my sauce with your pasta? So what is that unique value proposition? Sometimes it's that the product is, locally sourced and locally made. Sometimes there's a particular health component to it. It fits a particular dietary need. Sometimes it's just that it is an artisanal product. So you're using, the best ingredients. It's going to command a higher retail price, but that's its unique value proposition. And the more unique you can make that, the more you can tie your value proposition to a need in the market that is not being met, the more success you will have with that particular product. So be thinking about that. It's also going to inform a lot of your marketing, really understanding why it is that folks are buying your product. And this is something because I know I get this answer a lot from folks when I ask them, all right, what's your value proposition? And I'll hear, well, it's the best fill in the blank that's out there. It's the best. That is really for your customers to decide. So I would challenge you to figure out, what is the unique value proposition that you would communicate to somebody before they've tried your product to convince them to try it. So you need to think of something a little more than, well, it's the best that's out there, because there's a step ahead of that. Because it's for your customer to decide. You have to convince them to try it in the first place. You're the newcomer out here. So folks already, they've got their potato salad that they buy every day. You need to figure out what it is about your product You need to incorporate that into your packaging, into your marketing, into the overall business plan of, no, my potato salad, is different because of X, Y, and Z. And what is that? And figure out how you communicate that, how you incorporate that into your elevator pitch if you're doing sampling and demo. And oh, excellent. You're on top of it there. So the potato salad, it's vegan. So that is a unique value proposition that, do the market research. And if you're saying, hey, there's no potato salad on these shelves that is vegan, you're missing out on that entire market segment there. I think that there are enough people out there that want potato salad who are vegan, that I will have sufficient sales for my business. So that's excellent. So thinking through, who are those competitors? Not just your direct competitors either. Like I mentioned, when people are going to the store, they're thinking through, what am I wanting for dinner? Do I want this? Do I want that? So what are those other options that are out there that are closely related? Think about, doing your research on those companies. What are the price points? What are they doing well? What are they not doing well? And what they're not doing well is opportunities for you to meet a market need on what customers are wanting. So gather all the info that you can on those products, be following them, and making sure that you're staying on top of that particular industry. Early on, for all the products that we've talked about, that you've mentioned so far, it's very difficult to do, like getting people to try your product. And here's why. Because legally, you have to have the commercial kitchen. You have to be legally set up as a business to be able to distribute food, whether it's free or not, whether you're distributing it to the general public. So in a lot of cases, you can connect with friends and family and have them try the product, get you feedback. Here's what I'd recommend there. Because they're your friends and family, they are going to say, this is great, this is the best, especially here in Kansas City. We are all very nice here in Kansas City. So they're going to say, oh, this is great, this is awesome. You want to get constructive feedback early on. So one of the strategies that I've recommended is that make a few different versions of your product. If you're contemplating using, different, tomatoes for the sauce, try to make a couple batches with the different tomatoes, make some different variations of that product, then give it to your friends and family. That opens the door for them to say, hey, I really love this one. Here's why. And I really don't like these versions. And here's why. And it opens a door to, kindly give feedback while still having that option to say, hey, this is my favorite one, but here's some things that could be improved here or there. Bonus points. Sometimes it's fun to just make one version of the product that's like objectively bad, just to kind of gauge what kind of feedback you're really getting. If they're like, yeah, this fourth one was awful, all right, that they're being straight with you. That's fantastic. If they're like, yeah, that one was, they're all great, you're like, okay, all right, I see what you're putting down there. And then also, you really need to make sure that you check your ego. I understand that these products are your baby. You've put a lot of time and effort, heart and soul into these products, but at the end of the day, it's a business. And you need to make sure that you are getting all the relevant information, taking that constructive criticism to make sure, because launching a food business is time consuming. It's expensive. It's not paying you a lot of money as you're getting started. It's a low margin industry, and that's just kind of the truth there. So you really want to keep that ego in check, take all of that constructive criticism, make changes as necessary. But definitely you don't want to be jumping into this because it's strictly a passion. Passion is good. You should have that. But you also need to make sure every step of the way that these things are making business sense. All right, let's talk about pricing and money. Here is where another handout comes into play. You can't quite see it here, but it's called Doing the Math. Again, if you don't have those handouts, make sure that you post them in the comments and get those sent your way. But the first part is talking over the economics of the unit. This is really, really important as you're getting started, is figuring out what is the cost of everything that goes into this, the packaging, the label, the ingredients. What does this one unit cost me? Because that's going to be important. Then on the other side is the ideal kind of market rate, the end consumer price, that retail price that you'll be charging. And that's where that research that you did on the competition is going to be pretty helpful. Also understanding that as a small food business, there is almost no scenario where you're competing and your value proposition is on price, because you're not cranking out 10,000 units an hour. You're not going to be able to sell your product cheaper than everybody, for the lower priced items in that category. So as a small food manufacturer, you are going to you're going to need to charge a higher price because you just don't have those efficiencies. So thinking about that, looking at the competition, understanding where you're going to be in that range. And then the tricky part is figuring out all that stuff in the middle. And this is where I see people get tripped up, because you're not just thinking about the end retail price and your cost. There is also the store that you are wholesaling to. They have to have a markup. And then there's also the distribution that goes in there. So one of the best things you can do for yourself in your financial plan is to incorporate those costs early on, even if they're not being applied at the time. So what I mean by that is you are making your product and it, costs you $1 to make, all in, label, packaging, ingredients. You go and start off, and this is a great strategy, selling at the farmer's market. And you're thinking, all right, it cost me $1 to make this product. I'm going to sell it for $2 at the farmer's market. Getting of that retail price, 50% markup, fantastic. I'm making $1 on everything that I'm selling. But are you thinking about the actual cost of that transportation? And then you also you'll have that the title of the class, getting into grocery stores. You have to figure in the margin of the grocery store. So thinking through the economics of the unit, you need to incorporate and think about, probably at least 35% of that overall retail price is going to have to go to the actual grocery store. It's going to depend on what your, product is, what the shelf life is. Is it refrigerated? Is it dry? There's a lot of variables there on what the grocery store and what kinds of grocery stores it is. Is it higher end grocery stores? What they're going to want for that particular margin. But a good average, a good place to be thinking about, initially is 35% is going to go to the grocery store. And then you also need to be thinking maybe about 25, 30. Again, it varies on the product, but an equivalent amount might be going towards distribution. Again, if it's frozen, if it needs to be cold, if it huge volume per unit, might be more expensive, but you need to be thinking about those costs now. So when you factor in those numbers into that original situation where you're like, it cost me $1 to make, selling it for $2. Wait, I need to give a portion of that to the grocery store. I need to give a portion of that to distribution, because eventually you're not going to be driving it around yourself. Eventually you'll need to expand from the farmers markets. So you're getting into those grocery stores and you're now wholesaling. Be thinking about that price structure before, because it's really hard once your customers get used to buying your product for $2 or whatever it may be. It is incredibly hard to jump that price significantly as you figure out, oh my gosh, I got to pay the logistics, the distributor, and I got to factor in. And another component in there is eventually if you've got a salesperson or broker that is actually, conducting those transactions and getting you into other stores, that's another slice that you need to be considering per product on what that cost really is. So definitely be thinking through that early on, so you don't have to have huge price fluctuations as you're adding those other components. So yeah, your margin might look really high when you are selling it directly to the customer at the farmer's market, just to get a little bit of traction, interaction with customers, and get started. And then the rest of the doing the math portion here is just standard, planning for a small business. So figuring out what are all your startup costs, figuring out what are all the operating costs, doing as much homework as you can. And the reason that that's important is early on, you want to have the most educated idea of what your break-even point might be. So figuring out all those costs. If you're building out a facility, if you know you're going to have a staff of so many folks, if you have to buy this equipment, I like doing the exercise working with folks where, okay, so we already kind of know the economics of the unit. We know how much profit you're making per unit, ideally, whether you're wholesaling at this point or selling direct to the consumer. You can kind of do the math backwards and figure out how many units do I have to sell to break even? And how reasonable is it that I would be able to sell? Can I, make that work? And here's the honest truth. Sometimes you do the math and it doesn't work out. You realize that the break-even number of units you have to sell is so high that it just doesn't make sense. And I've worked with businesses that have figured this out, and you can remedy it. Maybe, that ideal, really fancy packaging that you wanted to incorporate, maybe that just doesn't make financial sense. You just can't, you need to look at something a little bit more reasonable as far as the packaging, or maybe you need to reevaluate the ingredients that are going in there. It happens. But what you don't want to do is just assume, it's all going to work out. I'm going to spend the money. I'm going to buy the equipment. I'm going to sign a 3-year lease to a space, get it all equipped. And you realize, 2, 3, 4 years later, you're like, wow, I am still heavily in the red here. You can do a lot of this financial research early on. There are fantastic organizations that can help work through this all with you. A great place to start here, if you're not familiar, Casey SourceLink aggregates all the different nonprofit resources in the metro area. So you can get a full kind of comprehensive list of who's out there to help. And of course, the Square One team with Mid-Continent Public Library can absolutely have a one-on-one with you and help you and kind of work through that business plan. So definitely utilize those free resources out there, those experts that are willing to spend the time and kind of help you out. Because especially if this is your first time getting into this and selling a product or selling a food product, connect with those folks that have some experience to kind of help you out there. Because again, I have seen enough scenarios where folks just they go through the motions, I got to buy this, I got to do that, I got to do this, not thinking through the whole kind of financial future of what that really means. So it's really good for your planning to have that idea of, I've got to sell this many units and I can do that probably within this amount of time and get to a break-even point where I'm actually turning some kind of profit. And it may take some time, but you want to know that ahead of time before you're spending the money, before you're spending the time. All right. Yep. And we all talked about those items there. I'm going to take just a second of a break before we transition, because we're going from one heavy topic of the finances to another heavy topic of the regulatory. So I'm just kind of curious. I'm going to make sure that I go through the comments here, make sure that there's no questions on anything that I've said so far before I jump into all of the regulatory items. So just like any other business, you're starting off, you're setting up a business entity, you've got some choices there. So again, there are resources to kind of help you out with what entity type makes sense for you. You're getting the standard tax IDs, the standard local permits, but where it starts to get a little trickier is with the health specific permits. So making sure that you are having a conversation with your local health department, if that even is something, whether it's through the local health department, but if you're getting into stores and you're wholesaling, and we're in Kansas City, so we're right on state line, it is very likely for most of the food products that you're going to be under the jurisdiction of the FDA. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that entails specifically for food products that are being sold wholesale to a restaurant or to a grocery store or somebody else who is then actually conducting the transaction to the end consumer. So let's take a second here and go through some of the products that we've talked about so far that you've mentioned. So I'm going to go down the list here. Pasta sauce. Okay. So if you are taking what is most likely an acidified food and you're putting it in a jar, you're jarring it, and at some capacity you are hot filling it, or you're filling it in such a manner that's going to make it shelf stable. There's actually testing specifically that you need to do for that pasta sauce. To make sure that that environment isn't going to grow, the really dangerous kind of pathogens. So you would be sending your formula and versions of your product to a food laboratory. That can be through a university system. There are private laboratories that you can connect with. I can definitely, message me later and I can send you some information on where you might have some options to get that testing done. But that's going to be something that will be required for a shelf-stable acidified food. Most of your pasta sauces fall into that category. Beverages are unique in that there are particular requirements. If you are, bottling that coffee, you're putting it into a can or a jar. Something that's unique with beverages is that you have to have that beverage filled and capped through a mechanical process. You cannot do it by hand, which with a pasta sauce, it's not a beverage. You could. There's nothing to say that for a small pasta sauce manufacturer that you could not by hand fill up those, jars. But with a beverage, you have to figure out some sort of mechanical system. So that would be something. And for all these product specific items, I always recommend that you connect with your local, if it's the FDA, which it would be for the pasta sauce, unless it contains meat like chicken or beef or something in there. Otherwise, it's going to be through the FDA. Your coffee, your beverages are also going to be through the FDA. So figuring out who is your local inspector authority that you can connect with on some of those specific items. And then what other products? Now with the frozen pasta sauce, as long as you're maintaining that product frozen through the whole, chain of custody and through the whole logistics process, that it's coming from your facility, getting transported frozen, being stored frozen at that store, that's not going to require the same testing that a shelf-stable pasta sauce is likely going to require. And then the same thing with that frozen product, the potato salad. Again, it's vegan, so I know it doesn't contain any meat, so it's not going to be under the USDA. That'll be through the FDA. But again, you're going to have to make sure that you're maintaining through that transportation process, maintaining the temperature on that product. Otherwise, all of these products I'm going to kind of talk about the general things that you're going to need to have. So I don't see, but yeah, if there's any other products that haven't been mentioned, or if I missed them in the chat, let me know. But I'm happy to kind of give an overview of what any specific considerations for that particular product might be. The things that apply to all of you. Labeling, and this is where another handout comes into place. We've got this fantastic, you can't quite see it here, example of a just add water hummus. I love the packaging as an example because it's very simple, it's very elegant, and it does a fantastic job of demonstrating all the elements that you have to have on a food label. Now, I do on that guide link to, if you're looking for really specific information, either connecting with your FDA inspector, or you can go to the FDA website and they have all the specific information. But for the purposes of this class, I just want to go over the main points and the big things that just about any label is going to have. So if you're looking at that guide right now, components that you have to have on the front, you got to identify the company. You've got to identify what the product is, including the common name of what that item is. So this is a great example because they've got a flavor name on there, but that doesn't tell the customer, like, wait, that's the flavor, but what actually is in there? So if you notice towards the bottom of that packaging, it says it's a just add water hummus. So thinking through, and you can look on the FDA website and figure out, okay, what is the common name of this particular product so I can identify that. And then an item that gets missed a lot is the net weight. So for all your products, you have to have that net weight in both metric and imperial units. You can see that on just about every food product. Oh, hey, excellent. There, we've got it pulled up. And you can see that on all, the food products you pick up on the shelf at the store. You can see that they've got, typically on the bottom, typically in the middle, they've got that net weight statement. And sometimes it's very common on the first draft of food labels that I see they're missing maybe the metric or they're missing the imperial. You got to have them both. And you can't have anything added in there either. That's another common thing that I see where they say very large 8 ounces. Nope. You just got to say that it's the 8 ounces. On the back, things that you will have to have, you have to have your ingredients listed from what there is the most of to what there is the least of. So have to have that on there. If there are allergens that are not listed in the ingredients, so if you get a flour that was manufactured, and they say on their manufacturing facility that also manufactures peanuts, you need to make sure that you have all of those allergen considerations. Now, if your product contains peanuts and peanuts are listed, you don't have to have that allergen statement on there. So those allergens, those big ones that you have to have listed if they are being incorporated and not listed in your ingredients. Otherwise, just having the ingredients listed from what there is the most of to what there is the least of. You have to have company contact information. So making sure that folks, whether it is customers or regulatory authorities, are able to connect with the company that is manufacturing this product or distributing this product, depending on how that logistics is happening. But for most of our small food businesses, they're handling their own logistics to get started with. So you've got that direct company info. The other item that you have to have is your best buy date. Now, important note, most of the time, that's not an expiration date. That is a best buy date. That is a date that you as the manufacturer are guaranteeing that your product is fresh and it's got the texture and it's got the flavor and it is exactly the way that you want it. So that is something that you can figure out yourself. You can also have, I mentioned those food laboratories, you can also have their tests that they can do to help you determine what that best buy date should be. But in a lot of cases, you can kind of figure out, that, potato salad, that you kind of keep it in the fridge, keep it in the conditions that you know that it would be stored in. Maybe make sure that it's got access to light if you can. If you've got a fridge, it's got a glass door, because that's going to be more representative of the home that your product would live in at the grocery store. Also, where the door, if it's behind a door, it gets open and closed all day, and kind of figure out, at what point is this just not the flavor and texture that I want it to be. So definitely resources there are the food lab, but on a lot of products, you can kind of figure that out, get some industry averages for particular product types and test it out yourself to figure out where, at what point you want to guarantee the freshness of those products. Now, here's the important thing too. For most small food businesses, your best buy date is also your batch lot system. For big companies, there's usually a string of numbers and letters on all these products that means absolutely nothing to you as the consumer, but it does indicate those batch lots. And that is important because one of the things that the FDA will ask you about is, what is your recall plan? So you have to keep records of all the ingredients that you are purchasing and all of the product batches that you are manufacturing, because it does happen. It happens to, small businesses, big businesses, but there are recalls on things. It may be not your fault whatsoever, but the particular tomatoes that you were using had a recall. So you need to be able to figure out, okay, those tomatoes correspond to these products that I make and these batches that I created on these dates. So I know if the best by date is this, that's something that I need to recall. And then where you are distributing these products. So whether you need to put it on your website, if you need to, connect with the grocery stores for them to pull those items. So you have to have that plan in place. That is something that the FDA will ask for. Items that you may need, your nutrition panel. I think a lot of you, know you've looked on products, you've looked at the nutrition facts panel before on different products. That is something that is technically not legally required until your company is selling $50,000 or more annually. But I will say, if you are planning to get into grocery stores, it is not uncommon that manager that you would be talking to that would be making that decision might want you to have your nutrition facts panel. They know that is something that their customers are looking for and your customers are looking for. So they might say, hey, we really want you to have that nutrition facts panel on there. So I would recommend earlier on in the process, before it's going to be legally required by the FDA, that you think about getting that put together. There are systems online that you can do that. Just make sure you read the fine print that they are still keeping your recipes confidential. This is another thing that the food laboratories that I was mentioning, that's another thing that they can help you out with. So they can help you and analyze and then give you that graphic that you would include, then send to your graphic designer or incorporate into your label design. And then another item that may be required is your barcode. So if you're getting into a larger grocery store, if they've got a point of sale system, they're going to want you to have your barcode. So you're going to need to connect with an organization. A very popular one is called GS1. So that's one that a lot of our small businesses use, but there's other options. You just want to ensure that you're acquiring your barcodes from a source that you know is going to work for the different outlets that you're going to want to sell into. So you got to do a little bit of research there, but GS1 is a great resource. That's one that's going to work pretty much anywhere, even like internationally, that you would be selling your product. But that's going to be something if you're not just going into small boutique shops, because you might notice if you go into a smaller shop, you just got like the stick-on price tag and they enter it in manually. But that's not quite how it would go at Hy-Vee. You need to have that barcode for their point of sale systems. So that is a very quick and rough kind of basics of what's going to need to go onto your food product label. You are also, in addition to all the local things that you are getting for wherever it is, whatever city or county, the particular jurisdiction that you are setting up your manufacturing facility, you are also registering with the FDA. And you can do that. You can go onto the FDA website right now and kind of see where there is a space to register a food facility. And that's actually relatively quick and painless process to get through. So you can kind of take a look at that. On that one, I will say one little detail. Your food facility years. So you want to make sure that you keep your login information for the FDA, because something common that I've run into is businesses forget what that is because they didn't need to make any changes. They didn't really need to do anything with their food facility registration with the FDA for 2 years. And then at that 2-year mark, the FDA says, you must renew this. You must tell us you are still in business. And then you need to log into that system. So make sure that you're saving that information and you're keeping that logged away. That's something every 2 years you need to make sure that you are on top of that. And then the other item, and this is for most all food business or small businesses really, is your insurance. You're going to have general liability. You're very likely at some point going to be required to have workers' comp. But then there's also some optional insurances that might make sense. So here's what I'll say on insurance. Make sure that you are working with an agent that is familiar with food businesses, ideally familiar with food products, because they are going to ask the right questions from you and be able to speak to the unique liability that there is with food. And sometimes we take this for granted because obviously we all eat, but you're making a thing that goes inside of people. There's just a lot of inherent liability there. So you want to make sure that you're talking with somebody that's familiar with the industry, that's going to be able to make recommendations on what insurance at what levels are going to make sense beyond the items that are just minimally going to be required legally from likely your city or jurisdiction or state that you're in. All right, we're switching gears here. We're talking about where you're actually making these products. So we're talking about that food facility. All right, so I had mentioned that for most all products, you're going to have that commercial facility in place before you distribute food to the general public. And again, really important, because sometimes I'll have folks that say, well, I'm not selling it, I'm just giving it away. Doesn't matter whether it's free, whether you're charging, you cannot distribute those food products to the general public unless there are a handful of products where state cottage food laws might allow you to operate from home and distribute and sell those products. A lot of baked goods, jams and jellies, spice blends. But if I'm not mistaken and I'm not forgetting anybody, I think all the products that were mentioned are gonna need to have that commercial facility set up to get started. So make sure as you are figuring out where you're going or getting set up that you're working with the local health agency, that you're working with the FDA early on in the process to make sure that before you commit yourself to a lease for a location, or maybe you're utilizing a shared space. There are absolutely great resources for shared kitchens to get started. So definitely looking into that. One thing that I throw out there, the kitchen door is a fantastic resource to connect to the shared spaces that exist. So definitely check that out to kind of see, maybe it makes sense to share. Something that's, not uncommon is maybe you start working with an existing restaurant. The thing there is that the restaurants are typically permitted exclusively by that local health jurisdiction. They may not be set up for FDA regulations, which can be different than the local health jurisdiction. So do keep that in mind, that if you're like, hey, I know somebody, they've got a restaurant, they're all permitted and licensed, it's gonna work out perfectly. Keep in mind, FDA regulations can be different than the local health jurisdiction. So make sure that you're keeping that in mind and you're communicating with all those parties to make sure that that space will function for you. And then the other option too, whether it's early on or maybe later in the process, is you can start a conversation with a co-packer, which is basically a contract manufacturer for food items. So you might connect with a company, start the process, you kind of go through, this is my formula, this is the packaging that I want to use. I'm going to want this many units on this kind of basis. Now, your co-packers are going to have typically a fairly, reasonable minimum. So maybe they'll say, we'll make your product, but we'll make it 1,000 at a time, or 5,000 or 10,000 at a time. So you'll have to figure that out and see, does that make sense? And will you be able to, distribute that much product reasonably while you're still in the process of getting connected to these stores? So it's a little chicken and egg there, where you need to have the stores set up and accepting your product to be able to give them, to make it. And if you're making so much of it, you got to figure out and make sure, does that minimum make sense? And it's not uncommon. I've worked with businesses where they start off making it on their own and they're making a few dozen, a reasonable amount of cases just to get into the stores, understanding that they're working up to the point that they're gonna, reasonably need that minimum order from that co-packer. So those are all options to be considering on how the product actually gets made. Oh, yeah. So I kind of skipped over and jumped into the label guide a little bit early there. All right. We're switching gears again, and we're talking about all the different goods and services that you are going to need to connect with. So figuring out how you are sourcing those ingredients. Maybe early on, you're just buying them at the grocery store, so you are able to get a product out there, and that's what makes sense just to get started, to do your first few events or farmers markets or get into that first store. Financially, that makes absolutely no sense. You are going to want to connect with a food distributor, or you're going to want to connect directly with the manufacturer of those particular ingredients, understanding that if you're getting to the manufacturer, a lot of times this is where minimums come into play again. They might have a minimum where if you're buying flour directly from the flour mill, they'll say, yes, we'll sell you flour, but the minimum order is 2 pallets of flour. That's great information to know, that at the point that you're buying that much of a particular ingredient, that there may be, a price break, of course, for buying that much. And then it becomes an option that you're, cutting out the middleman there on that particular item. But most likely you're starting off maybe with wholesale stores. So maybe it's Restaurant Depot, it's Costco or Sam's Club that you're getting those ingredients because you're buying them in small amount. And then eventually it makes sense to connect with a food distributor, Cisco, US Foods, lots of different options there that you're having them deliver your ingredients. So be thinking that through. We've got a particular question right here. Do you go to individual stores or company headquarters? Okay, this is a great question. It does come up later in the presentation, but since you asked it now, I'm going to jump ahead. So the answer is yes, it's either. As you are connecting with those stores, it depends on how that particular store is set up. So you mentioned Hy-Vee. Hy-Vee typically allows its individual stores and sometimes its individual departments to have the power to make the decisions on what products go on the shelf. That's not always the case. There are grocery stores that are set up a little bit more corporate, that you don't walk into the individual specific store. You do have to go to, a procurement person or corporate office. That's a great example is you're not going into the local Quick Trip to get your product, on the shelf at Quick Trip. That's going to be something that's made at a higher level on that decision. So it's very common for small food businesses to start with the stores, smaller local boutique stores that are able to make those decisions fairly readily at the store or department level. And then as you build that up and you get used to that process, then it makes sense to maybe approach a store where they're going to be they're not ordering product for a location, they are ordering product for a district, for a multiple stores at one time. You don't want to start there necessarily. That's a huge cost to you. Kind of risky too, depending on really how that product is moving. So a lot of times it makes sense. Figure out the stores that will make that decision more at the local level. Here's also, I'm going to jump ahead into marketing a little bit, where if you're doing like farmers markets or you're doing different food product events, that is a great place to have conversations with the other vendors and ask them, hey, how are you also? Are you wholesaling your product? Where are you wholesaling it? How did it work out? So you can start to get that information. So that's a great resource, not only to do the event to make some sales, but also to connect with the other vendors to kind of figure out, hey, what sales outlets are options for me, and how are they working for these other businesses? So unfortunately, there's not a simple answer to that question. It really depends on how that particular company handles that process. Okay, jumping back to goods and services. Something that I have always recommended that came into highlight recently this past year is keeping ideas of who your backups for these items are, because even before the craziness of supply chain issues that is this past year, there were always issues. There were always bottlenecks. There were always manufacturing defects. There were always, issues with growing seasons or not being able to get particular produce or whatever it may be. Here's the difficult thing with food products is once you get onto a store shelf, if you are not able to fill that shelf, they're going to find another product fairly readily. And once you have kind of lost your spot on a shelf, it is more difficult to get it back than it was to get on the shelf in the first place. Because one of the big concerns from store managers or whoever making these decisions is reliability. They want to make sure that products are on those shelves. Empty shelves are bad for business for those grocery stores. So I know recently so many issues with supply chain and getting packaging and labels and ingredients. So now more than ever, that's important, but that's not going away. That's always been an issue. It will be an issue. So you as the business owner need to be thinking about, okay, if all of a sudden I cannot buy my plastic deli containers, I can't buy the cans for the coffee, is there somebody else that sells the same can? Because you really can't make huge changes to your packaging, especially as you are scaling up, because you've got a label that is designed for a specific size. That label has information about the specific volume of what is in that container. For some items, like the shelf-stable pasta sauce, if you make a significant change to the shape and size of that jar, you have to go back and get it tested again, potentially, to make sure that it's still the water activity and the acidity and the new size of the jar, all make sure that there's not the potential for those pathogens to grow. So that is a huge just logistical error or issue for you. So be thinking about, can I get this packaging somewhere else? Who is that if something were to happen? Or particular ingredients as well, especially unique ingredients. When you're making that vegan potato salad, there might be some more novel, more unique ingredients that go in there to replicate the same texture and flavor that you might have from a non-vegan potato salad. So making sure that before it becomes an issue that you've got in your planning, I know I can get those ingredients from this other place. Worst case scenario. And the difficult thing is it's going to happen. At some point, some ingredient is just not going to be available, but the grocery stores, they don't care. They need that product. So you need to make sure that you are preparing to make sure that you're reliable. On services, be thinking about, unless you are, accounting is your thing, very quickly, it's going to make sense to contract that out to somebody, that the time that you would be spending trying to figure out your accounting and taxes and bookkeeping, it's more beneficial to you to pay for a few hours of somebody else's time that can get that done efficiently and well, and for you to focus on what you do well, of making product, of selling that product, of being out there in front of customers, generating sales, that you'll recoup the cost of whoever that service provider is by reallocating your very limited time on the things that you do really well, making that product, selling that product. So definitely be thinking about that, where and when it makes sense to be contracting these components of the business. Because here's the truth. You can't do it all. Even on items that I think I'm like, oh, I could do this. I could, man, I know I can, but does it make sense for me to spend the time doing it? Or does it make sense for me to allocate some funds to make sure that that's being taken care of over here so I can focus on what I do well, of, promoting and running my organization. And then two, thinking through, your marketing, who else does it make sense at some point to be, working with a firm that's helping take care of that component. So think through all those different services and at what point it makes sense. Because I see a lot of entrepreneurs, and I get it. I totally get it that you're like, I can do all these things. Why the heck am I paying somebody? I know I am an intelligent human being, very capable. I can do it all. Yes, you can. But does it make sense for the business? Does it make sense financially? You're going to have to, take some of these components off your plate to be able to really work, not in the business, but on the business. And thinking through what things can be automated, also that can help you out. So be thinking through those things early on, so you kind of have an idea of who you might be reaching out to at what point, to help you focus yourself on working on that business. All right. I had jumped ahead a little bit, but now we're on the step. We're actually getting into the stores. So the first thing, like I said, figure out who does make those procurement decisions. So like I said, sometimes it's at the store or department level. Sometimes it is at the corporate level. You need to figure that out. You can ask some other food manufacturers. You can contact them and just figure out and say, kind of follow through and see, hey, who makes these decisions? Who do I need to talk to? Also thinking through what stores make sense. So if it is, an option that you're going store to store, figuring out where do I want to start? Where if I've got an idea of who my target market is, I can do some research. And a great resource through Mid-Continent Public Library is you can, access, industry and demographic databases that normally would cost businesses a whole lot of money to subscribe to get that information, but you can get it for the low price of having a library card. So definitely leverage, again, some of those free resources here as you're doing your research and kind of figuring out what stores does it make sense for me to start that process. Where am I going to get the best return on investment of my time? Talking with these stores, that takes you time. You've got to drive out there. You've got to come prepared. You got to figure out. You have to have that conversation and get actually accepted in that store and drive out there. So make sure that you are figuring out and doing some research ahead of time. Maybe it's not the store that's right by where you're manufacturing or right by your house. That's okay. You need to figure out where your customers are, and that's going to help you inform what stores you want to be wholesaling to. And then the terms. So this is something interesting as well. There's two general categories or ways to approach the terms on how you sell the products to the store and they pay you back. In some cases, there's more of a guaranteed program where basically you just sell your products wholesale to that store. You sell them 5 cases of the product, they pay you, they figure out what to do with those products after that. Or you can do more of a non-guaranteed program. It's more of like a consignment where you deliver the products to the store and then you get paid as those products sell. That's probably more common for startup new businesses. You are an unknown thing to those managers, so it might make them more inclined to accept your product if it's that non-guaranteed where you're just getting paid as things sell. Downside is if things don't sell, you're functionally buying back those products, so you're eating that loss. But the downside to the guaranteed program is if that store manager is like really excited about your product and buys way too much, what you don't want, what they'll do is, oh my gosh, we're sitting on last product and its best buy date is in a week. We are going to mark it down. And early on, it's just really not beneficial to the brand because you're just now making those connections with your customers. And we had talked about when your customers early on get used to one price, and that's the discounted price, that's not what you want, because that's not what's going to make sense for the business. So that's the other consideration, that, yay, I get to sell a whole bunch of product to a store. This is where your research kind of helps out. And maybe as you learn how much product is really moving at a grocery store this size with these, demographics of folks that live around this store, maybe we don't buy 5 cases, maybe we start with 2 cases right now and see how things go. So either way, there's pros and cons to either option there, but just be understanding of what are you going to approach the store with. Maybe you're saying, hey, this is a non-guaranteed, you pay me as these products sell, or just traditional, hey, you buy these. So you've got the option there. You're really coming to the table and kind of suggesting to that decision maker, what terms that you're proposing there. And the most really important thing if you're just walking into the stores themselves and kind of figuring out who makes that decision. And here's another important thing there too. You might be tempted to just leave some samples and some information at the customer service desk, because they might say, hey, that person's not here today. I don't know. They'll be in tomorrow, or they'll be in another time. Don't do that. It's not going to get to that person. There's going to be 5 million things that happen between you dropping that stuff off and that decision maker getting there. Your best bet is to figure out a good time. So a time that person will be there, but a time that person is not going to be insanely busy either, that you can have that conversation with them. So be thinking about that. Be thinking about how you are going to be prepared. That I would recommend that at the point that you are going to grocery stores, you've got everything in place. You've got your label, you're permitted, license, you've got your insurance, you've got everything that you need to legally sell that product, and ideally to make a sale right then and there. Because in a lot of cases, that decision maker is going to make a decision pretty readily. A tough thing to tell you that in most cases, if somebody's like, I don't know, I'll get back with you later, and they don't get back with you, fairly soon, within a few days, it might be a functional no. You might follow, you probably should follow back up with them, but also understanding, hey, let's be thinking about some other sales outlets that I can approach. So be ready to make that sale, because if you're way out, you got to start the process all over again. Again, 5 million things in between that first meeting and the next meeting. It may be a different person in that position. Either way, you're starting the whole conversation again. So you want to be able to have everything ready to be able to make that sale at that time that you're having that conversation. You want to make sure that you're demonstrating reliability. This is the number one thing that I hear from, managers and decision makers when they're dealing with small local businesses, is that they are worried that, they'll say, come on in, get on the shelf, and then like a month later, nothing. You just vanish. And it happens because that's the life of a small business. So you need to be thinking about, how do I demonstrate that I'm going to be reliable? So it may not make sense to go into your first grocery store and like, I've never done this before, I'm just figuring it out. Like, you want to be polished. You want to have your presentation together. You want to have your information that you would be leaving. That, if you're leaving that sell sheet, that's going to have, and you can look up examples of this online, of a sell sheet that's going to have all the information of the product dimensions, units per case, your UPC, your barcode on there, have all the information that's going to be pertinent to that decision maker, that you can leave them with samples of the product and that kind of thing. But again, demonstrate that reliability, professionalism, that you're ready to do business. So be thinking through all that. Make sure that you're ready at the time that you're reaching out to these decision makers. All right. So, okay, we've gotten metaphorically sold into the store. Now you got to literally get that product into the store. And the crazy thing is, this is actually something that a lot of folks don't fully consider, but it's a huge component of a food manufacturing business, is the actual logistics of getting that product from where it is made to where it's getting sold. So again, we've thought through the financial process of, what is that really going to cost? Whether I'm doing the logistics myself, whether I am contracting that out to a distribution company, either way, there is a fairly significant cost to that. And something that I've heard from food businesses I work with in the past is that they're like, man, I'm spending way more time driving around to stores delivering product than I really am making the product. I've got a significant amount of my time that's being invested into logistics more than anything else. So it is a huge component, and be thinking about that and the cost that's associated with that, and the process of, hey, if you've got a frozen item, if you've got a refrigerated item, do you have the vehicle that can get that product, safely and maintain that temperature all the way to the store? So be thinking about that. And some stores are going to require that those products be delivered in a commercial vehicle. So maybe that is a refrigerated box truck. Some stores may not care. As long as it's coming in to temperature, that's all right. So it may be, a personal vehicle, but you've got a fridge cooler system, something in place that can assuredly maintain that temperature through the process of you making that delivery. So yeah, most folks are starting off. They're doing the deliveries themselves to those first few retail outlets that they're getting into. Also, be thinking about the fact that in a lot of cases, you are actually stocking the shelves. You are going in there and putting those items and dusting them if necessary, and making sure that you're full up in your space that's been allocated to you. Sometimes that is, hey, you're just delivering to the receiving area and then the grocery store. So that is something that's part of that conversation, to make sure that hey, what are your responsibilities? What are the responsibilities for the staff of the grocery store? That was something, I'll tell you, as a little kid in the grocery store, that always threw me off, because I would see the Coca-Cola guy there stocking the shelves. And I'd be like, hey, do you know where this is? And they're like, I have no idea. I don't work in the store. And I'm like, are you sure? But now I understand, no, he did not. He was just the person delivering that particular product to the particular location that they had allocated to them in the store. So yeah, figuring out the financials of the distribution. Also, yeah, we had talked about that non-guaranteed program, that if you're needing to make sure that you're removing and refunding that product that's past its time. And then, yeah, we talked about making sure that you're keeping the product safe and temperature controlled. And even for your dry products, there is still temperature considerations that you cannot get that product to like 100 degrees in the summertime. So you're still, again, need to make sure that you're keeping, safe temperatures, and a lot of those details are in FDA guidelines. And then, yeah, like I said, sometimes the grocery store is going to require you to have a commercial vehicle. They won't let you show up in a personal vehicle. It just kind of depends on that particular establishment. And yeah, be thinking about and having that conversation with distribution companies and figuring out the math yourself on what volume of product is it going to make sense that I really need to pay somebody else to do this, and what are their terms, and start to get familiar before you need it on who the options are and how it's going to work potentially to distribute your product. Whew, all right, let's jump into marketing. This is where another handout comes into place. This handy dandy, it's got the blue little icons. With marketing, one of the first things I like to start with is your brand. That's the first step. So don't think about what the marketing strategy is. Think about who your brand is. And I chose the word who particularly because I like to think about a brand as a personification of your business. So thinking about what's your brand, what's your company's style? How do they communicate? How do they communicate with customers? Who is that company? And it may be very, directly associated with you. You see a lot of brands that are tied directly to the owner of that company. There's pros and cons to doing it that way, or it may be completely different. I could have a brand of, home style cookies. So my brand is more of kind of a grandma archetype. So on my social media and on my website, I want to be able to communicate that feel, that communication style. And the reason you do this is because humans still interact with abstract things like businesses the same way that they interact with humans, with friends and family members. Big brands sometimes do this to like a really literal extent, like Coca-Cola. They put the names, just people's names on the Coca-Cola bottles. It's kind of genius because when you see your friend or your family member's name on the Coca-Cola bottle, now it's triggering all these thoughts about, oh, I love that person. They're so great. I wonder what they're up to. But this bottle of soft drink is eliciting these feelings and then making that subconscious connection with you there. But that strategy still makes a lot of sense when you're thinking about the brand, even for a small food business. So who is your brand and how does that benefit in connecting with your customers? And again, thinking about how you're engaging with your customers. This becomes really difficult as you are wholesaling product because now you're at least 1 degree separated from the end consumer, the person that's actually enjoying your product. Early on, when you're doing events or farmers markets, that's great market research to connect with customers, to talk to them, to kind of figure out what's important to them, what they like about your product, maybe what they don't like, what they think could be improved, and getting all that information, figuring out, hey, who is it? Who really is my target market? Who's coming here and spending money on this product? But as you get those degrees of separation, where maybe you're passing your product along to a distributor, and your distributor's passing along your product to stores, you're getting more and more disconnected from the end consumer, the people who are actually spending that money on your product. So be thinking about strategies. Certainly using social media is a great tool to have a strategy to connect with customers and still kind of figuring out all those questions of who's buying your product and why are they buying your product? What do they like about it? And then the next step is thinking about, once you've developed that brand and you've kind of identified who's your target market, who's buying your product, what then is your overall strategy for marketing? So you want to be strategic about this, because I see a lot of times with small businesses that they're just kind of doing the throw the spaghetti at the wall with different ideas. Like maybe they're running particular advertising on Google or Facebook, or maybe they're doing contests online, or they're running promotions at grocery stores, or doing sampling, or they're just doing these different things with varying degrees of results. But unless you are planning those items strategically and figuring out how you measure the success of those items, you really don't know. Maybe they're helping you out. Maybe they're an absolute waste of time and money. So I like to think about your marketing strategy kind of like a science experiment. So if you think back to 8th grade science class, where you set up a hypothesis and then you figure out how you're going to measure it, and then you figure out the actual experiment. Same thing with your marketing strategy. You are starting off with a particular measurable goal of, I want to get X number of people engaged on social media every week or month. I want to get into 5 new stores. I want to get 20% more new customers or repeat customers. Whatever it may be, you're starting with something measurable, because you're going to go back and figure out if the stuff you did actually worked. So once you've got that measurable goal, you're figuring out the objectives and the overall strategy of how you are going to accomplish that. So we're going to communicate this overall message to our customers. So this is a product that is healthy for you and for the environment, and we are very in tune with nature. So we got this overall kind of communication strategy that we're trying to convey, and then the particular tactics. And that's where, okay, you're asking about those in-store demos. That would be a particular tactic that you would employ as part of an overall strategy. So you want to make sure when you're putting that person into the store, or whether it's you, early on, it's probably you, but whoever it is, they know exactly what they need to be communicating with those potential customers in the store about not just the product itself, but the story behind that product, why it's important, how it ties into that value proposition, and how it ties into the particular needs and desires that you've identified in those customers. So in-store demos make a whole lot of sense. Typically, they get a lot of traction while they are happening. So you'll get direct sales associated with that person just doing sampling and getting people trying the product. And typically, you'll get residual sales after those demos. So people are coming back and they're like, yeah, that was really good, and I brought it home to my family, but they finished all of the sauce. It was all gone. So I had to go back and I got to buy some more. Or maybe I needed to buy some for a friend. And then, so a lot of times it makes sense to have a regular rotation of those demos, because you get the sales bump while they happen, and then you get the residual. That's something that grocery stores like typically also, because that's more sales for them. So it's not uncommon sometimes that particular stores will require in-store demos for new products that they're taking in, because they know that that's going to be important to drive sales for something new. Because they know people coming in the store are not coming in particularly for that new product. They don't know it exists. So a great strategy to get them acquainted with the product and start connecting with the actual target market is just start trying it out. So that's a great tactic, but I would encourage that as you are doing those in-store demos, or whatever the particular thing is that you're doing, whether it's particular advertising, that it all goes back to what's the overall strategy and what's the overall goal that we're trying to achieve, because that's going to inform what that person is saying, and some of the details thereof, of that person at the table doing the demo. So be thinking about the overall strategy, what the measurable goals you're trying to achieve, and maybe it's just simply just looking for new sales, or we're trying to get those bumps in sales. How do you measure that? How do you go back and you figured out the whole strategy, and you've employed your different tactics for a period of time? How do you go back and say this either achieved the goal that I wanted it to, or it didn't? And if it didn't, that's okay. You know that now, and you're not wasting the time and money doing those with that particular marketing campaign. Let's figure out something new. Or hey, it worked. That's something that you want to hold on to. Maybe that's an ongoing marketing campaign that you're re-employing on a regular basis, that is successfully moving the needle on whatever that measurable goal was. So again, be thinking about whatever you're doing in your marketing, wherever you're spending time and money, that it is part of an overall strategy that's measurable. Otherwise, you're just wasting time, and you don't know what things are working out. So you want to make sure that you're able to measure that return on investment. All right. So you employed a successful marketing strategy. You are moving product. You're in multiple stores. Maybe you've contracted with somebody that's making your product. You've got distribution company in place. What does scaling up look like for a food manufacturing business? You want to be thinking about what are those next steps and when do they make sense for you. So be thinking ahead. Be like knowing, for example, once you get to a certain units per month that you're producing, maybe it makes sense that you invest in a particular piece of equipment. So knowing what that piece of equipment even is, knowing who manufactures it, what the cost of that is, what the return on that investment would be through the efficiency of purchasing it and the amount of product that you're able to produce more quickly, or understanding at what time it makes sense to contract with a co-packager, and figuring out what are those next steps and have them plotted ahead of time. So it's not that you're employing those changes at the time that it makes the most sense. And you're not looking back and saying, oh my gosh, I should have bought that piece of equipment like 2 years ago. What was I doing? I was spending so much time sticking the label myself manually on to all these jars. I should have got the machine that did that automatically. I could have been spending more time actually making sales and getting into stores. So know those things ahead of time, because it's so easy as you're working in the business that you've got your blinders on, you're chugging ahead, you've got to fulfill these orders, you got to do these things, you got to do the essentials. But if you take some time ahead of schedule to be plotting those, potential times that it makes sense to make big changes and to scale up the business, it'll do you a lot of favors. That you'll know, hey, wait, once we've gotten into 17 stores, I think it's time we pull the trigger and get that distribution company to do this, because it's going to take me or somebody on my team too much time to be driving to all these stores. And because you've already adjusted, you've already set your pricing accordingly, that you've had that conversation maybe ahead of time, that hey, they're gonna want 20% or 25%, whatever it may be, of the overall cost per unit to distribute it. That's okay. We've already got that built in. We don't have to make big changes. We don't have to figure out who's out there, who the distribution company is. All this. So when you're in the heat of business and fulfilling orders, you've got that already set up in place. So I think the moral story there is just be thinking ahead on scaling up and leveraging those resources again that are out there to help you. So it's always helpful to have that mentor or business coach or somebody else who's been there and done that to kind of help you out with that process. Because again, it's so easy to just keep running. And that's where I see businesses plateau, because they're just running, trying to do all the things, where they need to take a second, plan ahead, work with a resource, work on, not in the business, that they can successfully scale up that business. So be thinking about all those different components there. That is all 10 steps. All 10 steps to go from your idea of your product to actually getting into the store. And I guess technically that scaling up was a little beyond. That was a bonus. The 10th step was a bonus from once you get into the store, of really scaling up that production. So right now, I want to make sure, that was a lot of stuff, and I went through it really fast. I want to make sure, what questions do you have for me right now? Or do we want to go back? We've got some time. If we want to go back to any particular topic and go into a little bit more detail, happy to do that. And then also, if you're like me, you'll think of your question as soon as I log off. You're like, oh no, I should ask any of this. Please do just post those questions. Send those our way. We'll keep an eye out and make sure that we answer those after the program as well. And then, great point, if you see here in the comments, make sure that you fill out that survey. If you liked the program, please tell us. That way we can continue to put these programs on for you. Or if you've got any suggestions, I love those. That is where every one of these fun handouts was a suggestion from somebody. It's like, hold on, can we get a little bit of take-home info on this, particular topic? Or can you spend more time on a particular topic? All of that informs and changes this program. So please do let me know what you think. But if there's no questions right now, I might call it an evening. Megan, do we have any other housekeeping before we call it a night? Other than, I guess, take some time. Speaking of food products, make sure you take a visit to the grocery store, stock up in case you're going to get ice cream tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah, I was actually just looking at the forecast.
So it's
we'll see.
Okay, so Dennis he made a comment about a marketing review. Was there something specific? Like, did you want somebody to kind of go over like a marketing strategy? Because if so, again, there are great resources. I know that's something that Hannah with Mid-Continent can absolutely help you out with. There's tons of resources through KC SourceLink, whether it's a SCORE mentor or the Small Business Development Center, that can really, if marketing is not your expertise, or even if it is, that's what I went to school for, was public communication and marketing, and I still contract those services out to the folks that do that on a regular daily basis. So great resources there to help you out with marketing, because that's something that I see a lot of small businesses kind of struggle with, because it's not like the regulations where you have to do it. People will make sure you do it, and there's one way to do it. You get the licenses and the permits that are required. Marketing is a little bit more of an art and a science. So figuring that out is tricky. So definitely leveraging the resources and the folks that have done that, been there, done it successfully, to get some tips and have them help you and review that component of your business plan.
And if it's brand specific, we do. The library as of this week can offer some in-person programming again. So stay tuned. Well, not even stay tuned. It's live now, but we are able to do some in-person programming again. And we have a class coming up in 2 months in April up in Parkville. And that is with Cynthia Fales, and she will do a session on helping understand your own brand. And she has some questions that you walk through to help answer, come up with some keywords and phrases that then can help lead you to the word that keeps coming to mind is sussing out. I don't know how that works. Sussing out your brand. So we have that coming up in April among other classes, but that is a marketing specific to your branding story coming up in 2 months in person.
That
in a room with people.
What? Well, and also what's
Not
crazy
here by myself.
is that's a thing that you would pay somebody money to do. Like you would have, so having that as a resource for free is fantastic. So like I said, lots of, take advantage of those things. So
yeah. Oh, and one more plug. Actually, so Stephanie Zamora, who Xander and has done a lot of work with us, teaches a 5-week, we call it the Biz Action Plan cohort workshop. And we have one actually starting next week that will be fully virtual on Zoom. And that is a 5-week course that will take you through with worksheets to help sort of break down a business plan into tiny chunks that you work on one topic each week for 5 weeks. So we have a virtual one coming up, and then we also have an in-person one scheduled for May. That one is not open for registration yet, but for folks who want a little bit more hands-on with going through the different elements. And in those classes, it could be any business idea. It could be a service, it could be a product, it could be food, it could be a food truck, it could be anything. So we have those coming up too. So check those out as well, because those are really good curriculum, an extended curriculum experience.
Exactly, because I went over all of these topics in 10 minutes. Like there's only so much that we can really delve into. So it's a great next step on all of these items to connect with programs like that. Stephanie is awesome. So that would be a really enjoyable, informative program for you as well. So definitely, if you're not following the Square One program on their socials or connecting with them on the website, I definitely recommend that. Lots of great, awesome programs that are free.
Yeah. Right. Cool. And then one-on-ones are free too. And we have Hannah, who Xander mentioned, will do primarily marketing, social media. If you need help with your Facebook account or kind of picking which of all of the social medias should I spend my time on. And then Kelly is our business librarian, and he's the one who can really drive through how to use the databases and a lot of other library resources as well. And yeah, it's all free / paid for by your tax dollars. So take advantage of it. And we're here. We want to help.
So, yeah, stay in touch, everybody. Thank you so much. Take that survey. And hopefully we'll see you around for another class coming up, maybe even one of those in-person classes.
Yeah. It'll be fun.
Everybody, have a great evening.
Thanks, Xander.
Mm-hmm.